Hello everybody and welcome back to the Premier Injuries channel. It's been a long while, hasn't it, Ben?
Well, it's certainly been a long time for the Premier League, mate, but it's back with an absolute bang.
Yep.
18 press conferences on Friday. As always, most shoehorned in between that, I'll call it the witching hour, between 1 and 2. So updates are still coming through as we've just started recording. So a lot of this stuff might be hot off the press.
Yeah, and so this is the great thing about this, because we're going live just near to deadline. We obviously want to enjoy time with our families. Well, I'm speaking for myself, Ben. I don't know if you wanted to avoid some of the madness at Christmas, but we're doing it as close to the deadline as possible, and we have got as much injury news as possible as well. But if you miss any of the injury news, if you have questions, first of all, head over to the Premier Injuries website and you can check team by team, as you can see on screen. But also, if that doesn't answer your questions, Ben and I will do our utmost over the festive period to answer your questions. But do remember, we'll probably be tucking into some turkey rather than worrying too much about the Premier League. But yeah, so with this bit of World Cup time off, I'm sure a few people will be wanting to know, how have you been, Ben? Maybe some of the stuff that we've worked on behind the scenes, or is there anything that you want to discuss before we go live?
No, no, like you say, Jason, the work never stops. Although outwardly it may seem like it's been very quiet, but we're still doing a lot of work with the data. I'm still mopping up from the World Cup as it happens.
Yeah.
Looking at some data from 2018 and 2014 as well. Lots of exciting stuff in the pipeline. Heading into next year, we should have sports nutrition section added to the website, also a sports injury section. Already started recording podcasts for that and creating content with some, I'm going to show, world renowned celebrities within their field, let's just say, with CVs like that read like a list of who's who of the sporting world. So, like I say, really excited and looking forward to those articles and podcasts going live, and hopefully everybody else will like it as well. And a couple of little tweaks planned for the injury table and a couple of other things going on behind the scenes, and all around, enhancing that user experience.
Yeah, and just before we start as well, I have started my own Patreon as well. So you talked about some of the articles for Premier Injuries, but if people want to kind of look at my in-depth analysis as well, you can head over to that. In fact, I will put that in the chat box. But people are here for the predicted lineups, the injury news, Ben. So let's start off with our usual process. So just to remind people, it's been a little while, but we do go alphabetically. And then if we've missed any players, do ask right at the end. But we're going to start off with Bournemouth, the Cherries. What is the big injury news there at all, Ben?
Big injury news. We just had this one through as well. So it looks like I do have Tavernier on the right-hand side of a 4 in midfield. The likelihood is that he's probably going to miss out. There are also big question marks over the availability of Ryan Fredericks. Now, there's been no mention from Gary O'Neill about the fullback. However, he did allude to the fact ahead of the Carabao Cup tie with Newcastle that there was a sickness bug sweeping through the Cherries camp. Some of those players had been away from the main group for up to 10 days. So the assumption is that maybe Ryan Fredericks is one of those players who was struggling, although, given his injury problems, there are no guarantees with that. So maybe there's a couple of changes there. But Jefferson Lerma, he missed the defeat on Tyneside due to a knee problem. He is expected to recover. Others within that group, Kiefer Moore and Chris Mepham, they've both returned. No issues from the World Cup in Wales, so they're absolutely fine. A little bit too soon for David Brooks. Of course, he's in remission from that cancer, and also Neto, the goalkeeper, who suffered that muscular problem towards the back end of the first half of the campaign. But for now, Travers keeps his place in goal.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of turn things around in the second half of the season as well, because it wasn't a great start at all. And just before we start the Arsenal discussions, I have to represent the jumper you got me, Ben. I got a lovely early Christmas present from Ben here, an Arsenal Christmas jumper with Bergkamp on the back, and we could do with him right now in the team because obviously Gabriel Jesus is injured. You put Nketiah up top. There's been talk of Martinelli or maybe another way to kind of play around that injury, but you're sticking with him up top.
Yes, I think that for me, and this is just my opinion, I do think Nketiah deserves his shot in the Premier League. He's been used as more of a bit part player domestically in that competition, whereas, in the Carabao Cup or other competitions, he has really come to the fore. Now, for me, Martinelli is more of maybe a central option once Emile Smith-Rowe is back to full fitness. We know that he had that surgery to remedy a long-standing groin issue, and then a minor setback or reaction in training ruled him out of a couple of sessions. So that's why I have Martinelli on the left. Of course, Smith-Rowe is somebody who could come in there, and that would maybe push Martinelli centrally. But this is an opportunity for Nketiah, to grab that position and hopefully hold down that shirt. But it remains to be seen. Elsewhere within the squad, Mikel Arteta said that those who were involved at the World Cup have returned and there's no major issues. We assume that means Takahimo Tomiyasu, ongoing muscular issues, cough, and the latest one out in Qatar was a hamstring issue. That has restricted the amount of training that he's been able to do. That's why we have Ben White. And also we have Kieran Tierney on the left-hand side because Zinchenko, he's struggling as well with his own muscular problem. That's a cough-related issue.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to see how the team tactically adapt to that as well. A couple of injuries in the team, which was kind of like a set and forget team, wasn't it, for much of the season? But we shall see. Now, Aston Villa are going to be an exciting one because they're kind of unpredictable, aren't they, Ben? One of the big jobs with this is you predicting the 11, but we just don't know with Unai Emery for two reasons. First of all, we're not really sure what his best 11 is, but the second thing is he's such a pragmatic coach. He changes for almost every game. He adapts. So what would you say is the situation there? Is the team dictated to by injuries, or are you just kind of going with what you think tactically he'll do?
Not so much in terms of injuries, although we know Philip Coutinho and also Diego Carlos, they're both long-term absentees. So we're not expecting either of those players, certainly Carlos anyway, to be pushing for a starting berth anytime soon. You may notice that I do have Robin Olsen starting between the sticks. That's obviously because Emi Martinez, World Cup winner, was involved for Argentina, and that was just 5 days ago. Seems like an absolute lifetime, but that was 5 days. So he has actually, and I'm just watching that come through now. This document was created on a Wednesday, but Unai Emery has confirmed that Emi Martinez is out of the game. It doesn't come as any great surprise. Elsewhere within that team, there is possibilities around Danny Ings potentially coming in. I do have John McGinn as well starting, and that means that Ramsey has a place on the bench. I don't see a great deal of difference between those types of players, but McGinn has done all right in this mid-season friendlies games, got himself a goal or two. So that's why I've went with this group, and hopefully I won't be too far away.
So let's turn our attention on to Brentford and this kind of the kind of elephant in the room, the ever-changing but also unclear situation with Ivan Toney. But the rest of the team is pretty settled, isn't it, Ben?
It is, yes. And, there's a couple of injuries in that back line and certainly players who are not yet up to full fitness. So that's why we have Matthias Zanka-Jorgensen in there. And maybe that dictates sometimes how Thomas Frank wants to set up his team. We have seen 4-3-3 predominantly with Wissa playing alongside Toney and Mbeumo. In this instance, I've went with a 3-5-2, although, that's on the attack. Defending it's more of a 5 with Roerslev and Enrico Henry giving more of a freedom to push on. The only sort of main talking point that I'll probably look like you alluded to, as it currently stands, and we're waiting to hear from another update from the club. Obviously, Ivan Toney has been charged innocent and proven guilty, alleged betting offences, but he has until the 4th of January to respond to that charge. Now, there has been a precedent set here before, so there will be a period out of the game. It just depends on how long that will be. A player that I'll probably look to bring back in from this team, maybe Christian Norgod. We know that he had injury problems towards the back end of that first half, and he was just getting back up to speed, went with Denmark to the World Cup, limited minutes, if any at all. So he's returned and he is back in contention. But like I say, elsewhere, there aren't going to be, any major changes to this side.
One of the players that I really have enjoyed this season is Aaron Hickey, but he's still a while away, is he?
He has been spotted back on the training pitches. Now, as we always say, the caveat is a return to train isn't necessarily a return to play. So that depends, in terms of his sharpness and fitness. Brentford have had a number of behind closed doors games, the latest one being Chelsea, and they suffered a fairly heavy defeat at the hands of their London rivals. I think they conceded 5. So going anywhere near that Brentford defence at this moment isn't something that I would recommend. Like I say, I'm waiting to hear the news from Thomas Frank with regards to where Hickey is exactly in terms of that fitness and whether he's really pushing more for a place in that squad as opposed to a place in that starting 11.
Yeah, and that was one of the warnings I was going to give was Brentford not looking great at the back, but especially without Hickey in there as well, that just further devalues the interest. Brighton, now you've gone with an interesting 11 here with Undav starting. But yeah, just talk us through the team news and why you've kind of gone with these choices.
Yeah, Undav is a little bit of a punt. I suppose we could potentially be looking at maybe 1 or 2 different options in there. First and foremost, this has been brought about the fact that Danny Welbeck and also Adam Webster both picked up muscular problems in a mid-season friendly with Aston Villa. I think that was out in Dubai. So both of those players weren't fit for the Carabao Cup. They're not thought to be long-term, but whether they're fit enough to recover for game week 17 remains to be seen. We're waiting to hear again from the Brighton press conference. That'll be going on as we speak now. So I haven't had any further updates. Trossard, potentially, you could drop in there in attack. I mean, Undav wasn't great in the Carabao Cup. Did they play Reading? I think they did. And that was a 0-0 draw and they went out on penalties, if I recall correctly. So, he wasn't exactly pulling up any trees, but maybe he deserves his opportunity in the league. Like I say, I will hear from Roberto De Zerba, see what he's got to say, and potentially it may be Trossard that I'm dropping in there and placing somebody else in behind. What we do know is Alexi McAllister, World Cup winner, as we mentioned with Emi Martinez, he won't be back and available for this game. De Zerba said that he's going to give him around 10 to maybe 14 days off. So that's a slight indication that we're probably looking at the new year for the World Cup winner to return.
Apologies about my phone going off there, Benny boy. I don't know who's ringing me at this point. They know what I'm up to. The most important job at the moment, delivering the injury news. So let's turn our attention to Chelsea then. And we've talked about this, you and I, off air, but there's a lot of interest in Chelsea assets, which I don't know why at the moment. I've been doing some number crunching, and again, it's something that I might put out on my Patreon, but the Chelsea team have really not been good this season, and there's still a few injuries in there that are really going to dictate how the team can play. Obviously, Kante is one that really kind of alters the way that they play, and a really big loss and absence. But also, Reece James, you've put him back in the team, but just because he's back doesn't mean that he'll have those performances. I think the loss of Chilwell is stifling creativity. Cucurella does an all right job, but Chilwell is on another level. So yeah, what is the kind of latest news there? And I think one of the big ones that so many people have asked about is Mason Mount.
Yeah, Right, where to start with this Chelsea team? And I get what you're saying with regards to Graham Potter. What I would say in his defence, he was dropped into that Chelsea team mid-season. You know, we know it was congested. We know the schedule, particularly for those involved in European football, didn't really lend itself for coaches to do any real work with the players. So, you know, has this enforced break due to the World Cup, you know, given Graham Potter the opportunity to maybe implement some of his own tactics, some of his footballing philosophies? Time will only tell with that. Like I say, some of those pre-season, mid-season games, apologies, have offered some encouraging results. So, like I say, I'm maybe not as down on Chelsea as maybe you are. But I understand what the data said, and that's just a carryover from the previous manager. And like I say, I think the longer it goes on, the more Graham Potter will bring this team round to his way of thinking, and he will have that opportunity to implement his own game plan. So that's my opinion with regards to that. Now, where to start with regards to the team? Reece James, he played around about 65 minutes against Brentford on Tuesday. So that's why we have him back in there. Now, you know, like you said, is he going to be fully match fit? Is he going to be, you know, up to the level, pre-injury levels in terms of what's the needs and the demands of the Premier League? Probably not. But I still think he's one of the better options in there, with what Graham Potter has at his disposal. I think he's certainly a better option than Cesar Azpilicueta. And we've also seen Ruben Loftus-Cheek playing there on occasions. Now, he has actually been ruled out. On the left-hand side, Ben Chilwell, he's still recovering from that hamstring problem. He's not yet fully integrated with the team. So that's why we have Cucurella in there. Kai Havertz, he scored a hat-trick against Brentford. That's why I have him starting as opposed to maybe Aubameyang. And for those looking off with their focus of attention maybe on the goalkeeping situation, I do have Edouard Mendy starting ahead of Kepa. Again, this is just an opinion. There's certainly nothing definitive from that. There's been no update from the club with regards to where Kepa is in terms of his fitness, although he has been spotted back on the training pitches. That was a foot issue, plantar fasciitis, that ruled him out the back end of those games in that first block. And he was a keeper who actually owned. He was in great form, come from nowhere really when Mendy had been struggling with that knee complaint. But I just think the fact that Mendy has been playing regular football and Kepa's been on the training pitches for less than a week, I think that's why he's deserves that starting place as opposed to the Spaniard.
I just wanted to say as well, I don't want people to think that with my Arsenal bias or whatever, I'm just hating on Chelsea for no reason. But there's I do have other reservations over Reece James and the fact that Graham Potter loves to tinker the team. Sometimes he plays him as a right centre-back rather than right wing-back, and so, again, that removes some of his appeal. But could you quickly, Ben, just talk through what, we talk about return to play doesn't always mean return to performance. I mean, how long do you expect it for Reece James to get back to those return to performance levels?
Yeah, I mean, that's the holy grail. That's a $64,000 question. It differs from player to player. It differs on the length of time they've spent out, on the type of injury they had, the type of demands physically, positionally, what Graham Potter wants from Reece James. And we know he's a player that likes to work that line up and down the pitch. A lot of high intensity sprints, a lot of distance covered, so given the fact that he's had this setback, and we know he's had previous issues, there are a number of red flags there first and foremost. And typically, when you're looking at how to ensure that players are robust enough to cope with the physicalities of the league, you're looking at, well, how many minutes has this player had already this season, and what types of injuries have they had? And, do they have that accumulation of load, which then, can maybe transcend into fatigue? Now, for all of the issues that we've had with regards to the World Cup, one of the biggest things which I think will work in the favour of a lot of players is, we're not heading into this congested festive fixture programme where players are already fatigued. They've had an opportunity to rest back, and certainly, Reece James has had an opportunity to go through a comprehensive rehabilitation program. It's not been time crunched due to the fixtures, the demands and the pressures on the managers to rush somebody back in there. He's had an opportunity to go through that, almost take his time, let nature take his course, and then almost come back when he's ready. And that's coincided, quite nicely with the resumption of the Premier League. But like I say, I would still expect, and typically, we've heard players, talking about we're maybe not seeing performances return to pre-injury levels till maybe 3, 4, 5, and even 6 and 7 games beyond that. So we will see, but I think if we're heading early into, for me, Reece James is probably a player that I'd be looking to maybe target in early 2023. Like I say, get some good minutes in his legs, get a feel for the ball again, get a feel for the environment. And, once you get maybe that FA Cup fixture out of the way, providing Reece James has come through all of those tests without any kind of reaction, then I would expect him to kick on from there.
Let's turn our attention. We've got a question from GV. He says, what about Pulisic and Ziyech? Any news on them?
Of course, they've obviously been involved in the World Cup, and yes, look, the performances on that world stage have been well documented and talked about. But Graham Potter won't be seeing anything different, to what he sees on a daily basis down on the training pitches. He knows what both players are capable of. He knows that they're valuable members of the squads. Whether they feel that maybe is a different question. Just given the fact that, they've had this little bit of a disrupted period with the break post World Cup. That's why I don't have them starting in this team. But Graham Potter, undoubtedly, as we've seen with Brighton, and again, you mentioned this before, Graham Potter will include them at some point because inevitably he will chop and change that team. And I just want to touch upon, you said that there was maybe question marks with regards to the availability of Mason Mount. He was missing from that behind closed doors game with Brentford due to what was described as a minor calf issue, but he has been seen back on the training pitches. So I say it was just a short-term issue. So in terms of his fitness and sharpness, that isn't something that's going to be affected just with that small little niggle.
Right, so we do have a question about Fulham, but we will get to that when we get to Fulham because we have to focus on Crystal Palace, and the team look pretty strong for that first game week 17 fixture back.
Yeah, I was toying with a couple of ideas. There's never a great deal of change within that Palace lineup. Obviously, I have Edouard leading that line. For a time, it was between him and Mateta, but Edouard looks to have nailed that place down. Zaha, in Edouard's absence, was leading that front line, and that opens up opportunities for players to maybe move around positionally. But I've got Zaha back out there on the left-hand side, and I am going with Edouard. Ayew and Anderson, both confirmed by Patrick Vieira that they are in contention, following their involvement out in Qatar.
And so, moving from Crystal Palace, we get on to Everton. And when I was looking at the Brighton team, I totally forgot that Mapai has obviously moved from there. And it's obviously Welbeck who's more likely to lead the line. So with the Toffees, they've not had a vintage season. It's kind of touch and go, Lampard staying on. But I would say one of the standouts has obviously been Pickford. But what about the rest of the team? Do they have no excuses in terms of injuries to at least push on or try to push on in the second half of the season?
Yeah, time will tell. Nathan Patterson, hoping for a big second half of the season from him. I mean, Seamus Coleman, a great servant to the club, done an excellent job in his absence. But Frank Lampard definitely sees Patterson as that long-term holder of that right-back spot. So that's why we have him in there. Again, you touched upon Neil Maupay leading the Toffees line. That's because, those well-documented issues with Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think he went into that break with knee, shoulder, and some kind of other issue as well. So there were 3 separate injuries that he was actually managing. Now, the knee problem was the most severe of those. It was a shoulder issue. If I mention that, there's too many to recall. But Frank Lampard says he's a major doubt in terms of his availability for that game against Wolves. He's going to try and push him to get that match fitness, that match sharpness. But, given his history with regards to setbacks, he's not going to push him too hard because he doesn't want him suffering another reaction on the training pitches, which could potentially rule him out for, a longer period. So that's why we have Maupay in that starting lineup for the Toffees.
Victor has brought the questions just back quickly to Zinchenko. I think we did cover him a little bit, but he's asked, does anybody know what's up with him? There doesn't seem to be any news whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a calf injury. I think he's had 2 or possibly even 3 injuries relating specifically to that calf since his arrival in Arsenal. So that's the latest with regards to that. Now, Tomiyasu and Zinchenko were the players who were both sort of training away from the main group, while Tomiyasu was a lot closer than Zinchenko, which is why we don't have him pushing really for a start in that game week 17 match. But hopefully not too far away. Mikel Arteta, very coy, when asked with regards to updates on his squad. Zinchenko isn't a player that he's mentioned specifically during yesterday's press conference. So, yeah, I think it'll be a major surprise if he returns to the fold.
With Fulham in our sights now, and we've got a question on Mitrovic. So we've got Chris Gascoigne. He says, news just come in that Mitrovic is a doubt, fellas. I don't know if you've heard any of that information, Ben, but there was always this kind of air, hasn't there, been for a while because of what happened just before the World Cup. He missed 2 games. Then at the World Cup, he was kind of, isn't he going to play for Serbia? This is not to be unexpected if there are problems there. Is that correct to say, Ben?
It doesn't relate to that foot injury that was picked up during that previous international break that hampered him throughout those final weeks heading up to the World Cup. This is more of a fitness related issue and returning late from his exertions out in Qatar. So he's one of 3 or 4 players that Marco Silva discussed, had said that just returned to the training pitches now. He isn't going to make any decisions with regards to their availability yet. There are still a number of sessions that they will go through before they make the decision. But yeah, Mitrovic is included in that little group of players who needs to be assessed. So maybe he's one that I'd bring out, but I do still see Mitrovic as such a pivotal part of this Fulham side that maybe I'm just looking up, Jason, there's a remaining time meeting flashing up there on the screen.
Oh, it's because I'm not logged into our account.
So yeah, so Mitrovic is I do have him in there as it currently stands, but that could potentially change. Like I say, there'll be sessions today, also on Christmas Eve, and even on Christmas Day. And Marco Silva will leave everything up until the last minute before making a decision on his potential starting 11 on Boxing Day.
So Leeds are the next team up. And obviously Bamford is not leading the line here. So yeah, we've got Rodrigo instead. What is the kind of injury news there?
Where to start with Leeds? I think we have 11 players currently flagged. Patrick Bamford underwent groin surgery in early December. Now, again, a virus sweeping through that Leeds camp has hampered his recovery in terms of being able to get ready. So that's why we don't have him in the start 11. Rodrigo himself was due to play in a friendly on Wednesday night against Monaco. A tight hamstring kept him out of that one, but that was more of a precautionary measure, with Jess March saying that he should be absolutely fine. Jack Harrison, a ductor issue. That's another one who should be okay. We do have Adam Forshaw starting, and that's because Tyler Adams is serving a 1-match ban.
Continuing over to The Foxes. One team that I'm still not warming to, even though they've had quite a few wins recently. But I think one of the big things is you've got Vardy back leading the line, and also James Maddison in there as well, because obviously there's been question marks over his involvement in the World Cup. He wasn't involved at all, and so people were worried that he was injured. So is he fully clear now? Is he definitely going to start?
He isn't. Like I say, this predicted draft was put up on Wednesday. We've just had a confirmation that Brendan Rodgers said James Maddison is managing ongoing knee problems or issues. He will give him every opportunity to come out and prove his fitness ahead of the game, but he certainly is a question mark with regards to his availability against Newcastle. In that back line, we've got Daniel Amartey sitting in there. Johnny Evans, the latest in a long line of calf injuries. He's out, and that's going to be a period of what Brendan Rodgers referred to as quite a long period on the sidelines for him. Sayun Chu is another centre-back who's been managing muscle problems. That's hamstring, but he has been on the training pitches this week.
The next team up is Liverpool. And obviously with the Luis Diaz situation, we've kind of covered that a little bit in the midweek. But is there any kind of pending news affecting the first 11?
Yeah, we're hoping Trent's going to recover from the illness that kept him out of the Carabao Cup tie at the Etihad. So there's a little bit of a question mark over him. Whether Jordan Henderson is ready to start maybe ahead of Fabinho remains to be seen. There was a couple of injuries noted ahead of that game at the Etihad. We do have Roberto Firmino in this team. He's actually out. That's a calf problem that's ruled him out. I'm not sure what's happened with that, because I do have Carvalho starting, who scored last night in that team. And also Van Dijk. He was back on the training pitches on Thursday. He had a bit of an extended break following his exertions at the World Cup, but providing that he comes through those okay, doesn't catch this virus that's sweeping through the Liverpool camp, Oxlade-Chamberlain's another one that's been affected, then that should be okay. James Milner, hamstring, definitely out of the next couple of games.
And they played Manchester City in that Carabao Cup fixture. I think, just quick advice for me, a lot of people are worried about, should we have Foden in our teams, or should we save money and have not Cancelo and have somebody like John Stones? I think just go with the premiums. Stick with Cancelo. I wouldn't get Foden. I'd go with De Bruyne, just because he's going to start every game. And obviously Haaland, there's nobody questioning including him. But just looking at that kind of first 11 there doesn't seem to be any major injury news to a lot of the favourite assets.
Who's the main talking points? Ruben Diaz, hamstring injury, so that rules him out the back line. That makes things a little bit easier when trying to second guess Pep in terms of how he's going to line up that back four. We have the usual issues with regards to Phil Foden and Jack Grealish. I have included Kyle Walker and John Stones in the starting 11. They weren't named in that team that initially lined up against Liverpool. We had Nathan Ake back in there, so there's a couple of potentials that we can change around. Edison as well wasn't in the matchday squad on Thursday night. That was Ortega, but I've had nothing to suggest that Edison will not be available. The only player that we have definitively ruled out, other than Ruben Diaz, in terms of that injury, is for Julian Alvarez. Again, World Cup winner. He's out gallivanting, doing whatever, celebrating with his country. Calvin Phillips as well. He's come back, and he isn't 100% in terms of his fitness, so he's not training with the squad.
Right, so continue to the other side of Manchester. We're looking at United. Martial, Rashford, a few of these attacking players have got a lot of attention. I'm not too sure on them. But what do you think, Ben, on the Red Devils?
The biggest questions or concerns are in that back line, and I have Harry Maguire, of course, starting in there, but he missed out midweek due to a virus. Unlike injuries, we don't we don't know how players are going to respond. So this could be a late call, and it'll probably be how he feels over the next 24 to 48 hours will determine his availability with regards to that. On the right-hand side, Diogo Dalot, he picked up that hamstring problem playing for Portugal. That's why we have Wan-Bissaka in there. It is possible that we could put Malaysia in to that squad and swap over the fullbacks, but I'd have went with Wan-Bissaka. And elsewhere within that team, strange one, Eric Ten Hag singled out, and it might have been a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but Lisandro Martinez. He spoke about the possibility of the Argentine defender returning for that game against Nottingham Forest, and he said, well, at the minute I can't really give you an answer. He's out in Buenos Aires enjoying himself, touring the city in the car, and I understand it's the biggest, it's the biggest trophy that you can win in football, but he must realise that the Premier League starts on December the 27th. So, even if Martinez does return, it doesn't sound as if he'll be in the right either frame of mind or already physically to be thrown straight back into the Premier League. However, I am a little bit more confident over Rafael Varane. Of course, he might have been drowned in his sorrows as opposed to celebrating his World Cup.
So your boys, Newcastle, up next. And I think the only question mark is Callum Wilson. I think the rest of the team has a full bill of health in terms of the big fantasy Premier League assets.
Yeah, nothing wrong with Callum. Absolutely fine, 100%. In terms of, there was no real injury concern, I would say, out in Qatar. That was something that the press maybe just jumped on, and that was a little bit of tightness. So, he was never at risk of missing any games. He was fit, fully fit and available for Gareth Southgate. It was just a decision by the England coach not to involve him either more. Played the other night, played in the behind closed doors games, come through that with no problems.
All right, we are pressed for a bit of time because of the damn Zoom. We've got about a minute left. Nottingham Forest, I don't think we need to cover them too much. Southampton, I think as well, not much interest in them. Tottenham are the ones with a few talking points. Kulusevski returning to the team, I think, is a massive boost, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, Antonio Conte said Kulusevski's back to his pre-injury levels in terms of his fitness, so that's great. Have Heung-min Son starting as well. We know he'll be wearing that protective mask, but he's also been suffering from a virus, so hopefully he'll be okay. Ben Davies recovered from an abdominal issue. I have Dyer and Lenglet in there with Sanchez, the player, missing out. Bentancur targeting a return on New Year's Day, so he's going to be a big miss. So Bissouma sits alongside Højbjerg, and shout out to Matt Doherty, who had a great mid-season run of games, looking really sharp. Perisic has only returned to the build, and I think it was today, so that's why we have Doherty on that left-hand side.
And that is where we cut out there with Ben. I will see if I can get him back on, everybody, just for the time being. But we got cut short there just because of Zoom. It was a mistake on my behalf. So I'm just going to quickly see if I can send over a link to him and get some more information for you all. GV, hopefully we can get you a quick San Maximum update. But yeah, apologies, and hopefully Ben will be back very, very quickly within, as Rowan Atkinson's character in Love Actually would say, in the flashiest of flashes. So just sending him over the link now. But yeah, if you've got any final injury questions, we do have two more teams to go through in terms of West Ham and also in terms of Wolves. So if you do have questions on them, please do send them over. And then hopefully Ben is back on in just a few seconds. But yes, so hopefully he is joining in a few moments. And yeah, just I hope everybody's going to have a good Christmas. Please do, in the comments, just send us what you're up to, or yeah. And also do check out my new Patreon. that is up, live, running and kicking at the moment. So the first article is actually on set pieces. So if people want, maybe an edge in FPL, but also just general interest, it is on who are the best set piece teams in the Premier League. There's some surprising ones in there that people might not think have done all that good. And then also there's some surprise in terms of the bad teams as well. Again, teams who have just not met the expected standards. But there's going to be a few good articles up there as well. So I'm just checking where Ben is up to, and then hopefully we will just finish this podcast off. We've got probably about another 5-6 minutes, 2 more teams, and any questions that you have, put them in the chat. And like I said, GV, hopefully we get an answer to your question on Alan San Maxim. Also, question to everybody for the time being. Do you have any big differentials in your team? Are you rolling the dice? Are you trying to compete with your team mates or people in your league? Maybe going for a bit more of a punt? Let us know. Rodrigo status. Okay, Rodrigo, we will get a question to Ben. I think he is returning very soon. I'm just messaging right now. Right. Popped the big man a couple of questions, so hopefully he is returning. But yeah, who is your big differential in terms of your team? I'm really surprised that people are low ownership on Callum Wilson. If you go from game week 9 to the end of this period, pre-World Cup, Newcastle were the best attack in the Premier League. Most goals, highest XG, most big chances created. And so the team are absolutely flying, and he's leading. He's one of the best kind of strikers in the Premier League when he's fit and ready. Quite often, with Callum Wilson, it's his goal scoring ability is absolutely amazing. It's just mostly the injuries. Like Ben said, Callum Wilson is not injured. He should be fully fit when he is when the Premier League returns. So you're getting a really good goal scorer there for quite a good price, less than 10% ownership. But we do have Ben back, everybody, and I can just stop wittering on. We do have the big man back.
He's back.
He is back. Here he is. My goodness. So everybody, apologies for my wittering on, and hopefully that filled the time nicely. So we do have a little bit more time now. So in your absence, Ben, we have a question on Alan San Maxim. What is the update on him?
Presumably it relates to the knock that he picked up in the 2-1 win over Rio Vallecano last Saturday. That put question marks over his availability in the Carabao Cup against Bournemouth midweek. He was included in the matchday squad, but only on the bench. Now, Eddie Howe said that the speedy winger is working his way back up to speed. Of course, he was hampered by that hamstring issue in the first part of the season, so he's not quite there yet in terms of where he needs to be. And for that reason, I don't actually have him starting in that Newcastle team. There's a lot of competition up here on Tyneside at the moment. And he's a player who I see making more of an impact from the bench, certainly against Leicester. We'll see beyond that what happens. But of course, a lot of things can happen with regards to suspensions and injuries around this period and squad rotation. So, yeah, look, he's getting there. He's improving. He's moving in the right direction, but he certainly isn't 100%.
Now, Khalil has asked the question about one of your favourite assets from the Premier League this season. Rodrigo, you had him in at the start. You had him in when he was scoring goals left, right and centre. He was a certified Ben Dinnery differential. But what is his status? Khalil has says, I'm counting on Rodrigo as a differential. Basically plays as a number 9 on penalties. With Brentford injury and out of form, he's in his team. Is it all good with Rodrigo?
I wouldn't say all good. Like I say, he was penciled in to line up against Monaco. I think it was on Wednesday night. Completed a training session and then reported a tight hamstring. Now, Jess Marsh said it was more of a precautionary measure that he was omitted from the squad, but we all know issues with regards to hamstring problems and how they need to be very, very careful in terms of how you manage those. But as it stands, I do have Rodrigo starting. It isn't anything too serious, but it's something just to bear in mind in terms of maybe the minutes that he may be handed. Like I say, it's a very, very tough fixture. That game against Manchester City, you would expect the citizens to really come out and hit the second half of the season hard. And given the fact that Leeds have copious amounts of injury doubts and illness in the camp, then, it could be more of a, regardless of what Jess Marsh says, I cannot really see them going for the jugular against City because they could get hit for 5 or 6.
Yeah. We've got a question from Sam. He says, Conte just said that Perisic is available for Brentford whilst you have been on air. But is this kind of a situation, with Reece James return to play but not return to performance? Is Perisic maybe somebody who will be handled with care due to his age, the fact that he played only a few days ago with Croatia in that third place game? Is he going to be risked?
The fact that he played what will in essence be, I think, 8 days, his last game, that isn't an issue. If you look at the Premier League and how that would have typically panned out for those involved in domestic and maybe European football, then they would have been coming at this period with a high accumulation of load and at risk maybe of suffering setbacks. The World Cup has mitigated that risk for now. So the fact that these players have maybe been, involved in matches every 3 or 4 days or whatever it is, that's absolutely fine. Optimum levels of recovery, we're talking maybe 48 to 72 hours. Anything beyond that, then great. The only issue that you'd have is maybe Conte's probably been working on a lot of his game plans, over the past week or so. I know they played Nice, I think, again on Wednesday night, and he would have been working on his tactics and his philosophies heading into this period. So Perisic would have missed a part of that. But, with regards to his sharpness, his fitness, his availability, his suitability to play in that match, then look, I don't really think there's a question. So really, I think for me, if he's been given the thumbs up and he's back in the building and he's working normally, the fact that he's going to have a couple of days at least with the squad, that probably means that he comes in on the left-hand side, and I would throw Matt Doherty across onto the right. I think he deserves that starting berth ahead of Emerson Royale.
Finn has asked the question, thoughts on going for Salah and KDB? So I don't know if they're asking in comparison to one another, or if get them both in your team, but obviously then you're having a threemium because you've got Haaland as well. Do you have initial thoughts, Ben? I mean, what do you think about those two?
I own KDB first and foremost, and I said this prior to the game on Thursday night that following a disappointing World Cup and Belgium's exit, he might be a player that potentially feels as if he maybe has something to prove. The weight of expectation is such that, everybody believes that when De Bruyne steps out on the pitch, he's going to be banging out those 9 and 9.5 out of 10 performances. He's a guy with the ability to change and win games. Single-handedly, That didn't happen in the World Cup, and there were probably a number of reasons for that. One of them, he talked about, nerves of playing on the big stage, but there was a lot of unrest in that Belgium camp as well. So he certainly wasn't a happy camper. Returns in the Carabao Cup against Liverpool, had a great game, and Pep talked about how to get the best out of De Bruyne, sometimes he needs to be a little bit angry, a little bit upset. He needs to have that fire in his belly, and he appeared to have that. And I think certainly over these initial game weeks, then, if De Bruyne is, and he does have that fire in his belly, and he is going out to prove something, to, if any, to those people who are maybe questioning him, then I certainly want to be in the Manchester City and De Bruyne camp, as opposed to Liverpool and Salah, who, let's just, let's say that up until this point, they've been a little bit disappointing. They've been a little bit below par, and it's certainly more of a risky punt if you go down the Salah route.
The interesting thing for me is always the data. That's what guides my decision. KDB has a lot better data than Salah this season. Obviously, Salah kind of exceeds in terms of shots inside the box, but they're matched in terms of XGI. But if you look, Manchester City, they're just performing on such a better level. And also the other big indicator is it's a rare occasion, but Salah is underperforming his XGI data, whereas Kevin De Bruyne, his usual kind of high quality self, he's overperforming. So Salah per 90, 0.73 goal involvements, whereas De Bruyne is 1.03 goal involvements per 90. And he's feeding the best striker probably in the world at the moment. He's averaging 7.14 points per 90 compared to Salah's 5.97. There's a lot more going for it. You're hoping that Salah kind of turns things around, but there's no guarantees. Just because it's happened in the past, I don't think it has to happen in the present. So I would, if I was choosing a team, Finn, I would go for De Bruyne, just because he's got the consistency, he's got the data, that he's got the form to back him up, and also there's some nice fixtures as well for Manchester City as well. Let's go back to the injury news though, Ben, and one of the kind of big things that has dominated the Hammers season has been injuries. What is their injury situation at the moment? I can see that Zuma is not in the back line. That's going to be a big miss.
Zuma, knee problem, ongoing knee issues. We've seen that towards, I think it was game week 16, complained of a little bit of a problem in the warm-up, decided to go with that game, but was replaced early doors. Apparently, this knee issue dates back to his time at Chelsea, so he had some surgery to remedy that problem. So this weekend, or certainly the festive fixtures, are going to come a little bit too soon for him. We've just heard from David Moyes as well at the time of recording. So I do have Mikel Antonio starting in this team. However, that definitely will be changed. I'm thinking about going with Jared Bowen as leading that front line. Mikel Antonio is struggling with a calf problem, and we know that Gianluca Scamacca was forced off last Saturday early doors in a friendly with Fulham. That was an ankle sprain with that. So David Moyes confirms that. They're not entirely ruled out of the game, but both remain major doubts. Elsewhere, other talking points within the Hammers squad, there's been no mention of Aaron Cresswell. This goes back to a game early on, I think it was in December, where Cresswell was removed as a precaution after around about maybe 15, 20 minutes at Cambridge. And like I say, it was apparent that it was or reported that it was a minor hamstring issue, but he hasn't been seen since. So the fact that he hasn't been involved in any of those games up until this point is a major red flag, and it's a concern. And that's why I have Emerson starting there on the left-hand side, because Zuma is out of contention, like you say. And Ogbonna is another possibility in there. So I will have a little play around with this formation, but I have Kira, who's starting in that left-hand side alongside Dawson. Naif Agard is obviously attracting a lot of attention following his performances out of Qatar and, and the brilliant tournament that Morocco had. But injury and a virus has been affecting that, the centre back. I just think it's a little bit too soon for him. And I think realistically, we're probably looking at early 2023 before he's really forcing his way into contention for the Hammers.
Goodness me. I mean, there's a lot of virus going about at the moment as well. It's kind of dominating the London scene. I don't know if you guys are all right up in Newcastle, if you're safe from it. But what I was going to say, just to everybody listening, we've got a few questions about discussion points that we've already covered. So Nick has asked about Callum Wilson, who you've already kind of said he's fine and is not a minute's risk because, when he's fit, he starts. But just if people have missed some of the discussions, we have gone through alphabetically all the teams, so you can rewind back and it will be nicely on screen as well, so you can see who we have been chatting about. But Finn, I guess we haven't covered this. So Finn has asked, is Kyle Walker nailed?
Is anybody nailed in that Pep Guardiola team, other than maybe Edison and Haaland, even De Bruyne? Those are the three players that I would say would be nailed. I would have liked maybe to see Kyle Walker start against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup. That would make me a lot more confident and comfortable in naming him my starting 11. But like I say, I think he is an integral part of that team. And while there are other options that Pep can go down, I do think that, Kyle Walker, in terms of, again, his availability and his fitness and his sharpness, he's a player that has benefited from the World Cup and being out in Qatar. He had that surgery on his groin. So the opportunity to get some competitive minutes in his legs, he looked as if he come through those games, pretty much unscathed. And like I say, City will benefit from the fact that he's been able to get that little bit of sharpness. So, look, I'll go on, and I'm putting him in there in 95% chance that he's going to start for me.
What is the 5%?
It's going to backfire. It will backfire, but no. Yeah, look, he should be all right. He's returned to training. He's working fine, so I don't see why he won't start.
So just put a call in the chat, but also just for people listening as well. Any final questions, because we are on the last team from the Premier League, Wolverhampton Wanderers. What is the kind of injury situation there? Because it's going to have to be, with Julian Lopetegui, is that the new manager now? It's going to have to be a big, bold start, because they have been huge underperformers on lots of their stuff. They've been terrible at set pieces. They've got no goals from them. They've been terrible at scoring goals. They've been absolutely awful at matching their XG. They've been one of the worst teams in the Premier League this season. It's going to take a lot to kind of turn that ship around. Is it a personnel problem? I don't know. But yeah, what do you think with Wolves? Is the injury news at least good so that they can have a positive start?
Yes, what you're trying to say is Wolves have been absolutely crap, would be the long and the short of it.
Yes, yeah. But with data, less rude, more
look,
data.
Just crap. just crap. Let's not sugarcoat it. They've been poor for a long, long time. I used to love watching Wolves. And then they had that period of 12 to 18 months where their football just went down the toilet. And maybe that coincided with that setback for Raul Jimenez. And they just adopted that more conservative style approach to football. It was boring, and it backfired. But look, new manager, new horizon. Let's see what the future brings. But in terms of injuries and availability, 2 players introduced from the bench midweek in the Carabao Cup helped change the game. Ait-Nouri and I've just mentioned Raul Jimenez scored from the spot. So But whether he is in a position to really force his way in to that starting 11 remains to be seen. I do have Diego Costa. He missed the last two games of the first half after his dismissal. Sorry, the last three games, that was a red card. He returned in the Carabao Cup. Look, he's certainly not the player that we've seen at Chelsea, and he's in the twilight years of his career now. But Raul Jimenez, he's been managing that ongoing adductor issue that kept him out for several months. Heavily affected his availability out in Qatar. That was minimal minutes there for Mexico. I just don't think he has that sharpness and that load within his legs to maybe, realistically be pushing for a start. Elsewhere within the team, who's the major talking points? Do you know what? It's hard to have a lot of love for them. Chan done all right at the World Cup. He come off the bench midweek. I have him starting. Other possibilities within there would be around Adama Traore. The FPL community love Pedro Neto. The new manager, Lopetegui, says that he's probably around about a month away from rejoining the group. And then the expectation is that he'll probably be around maybe 4 to 5 weeks before he's actually realistically in contention for a start, given the fact that he's been sidelined for so long.
Well, we have one last question from one of our big supporters, Slavcho. Great to see you back. And he says, Merry Christmas, guys. So Merry Christmas. And Merry Christmas to everybody. I said it in your absence, Ben, when we lost the tech gremlins came in. But the last question, I guess, for this podcast, and the last one before Christmas, is do you think that the break will negatively affect Arsenal players losing the momentum and a few key players? I think Arsenal being quite lucky in the sense that it's only one key player really, but Jesus, you can't underestimate the brilliance of him this season. But the thing is obviously, it's been the discussion point a lot, is his contribution is more in kind of the build-up play than the goals. And maybe the team will be shifted, moved around, because we've got some fantastic creators in there. We don't just have Erdegaard, we've got Vieira. Maybe Nketiah can be the goal scorer that we've needed for a little bit as well, and the team can kind of work around his strengths and weaknesses. So at the moment, I don't see why not. I think everybody's on the same level playing field, and Arsenal psychologically, they'll be happy with the kind of situation. They'll have their focus, and from the interviews that I've seen with Mikel Arteta, especially the one on Sky Sports, he is so in tune with the team, the psychology, marginal gains just across the squad. I just hope that the big thing is dependent on the results from these difficult-ish fixtures in the next few game weeks. But they proved it in the early part of the season. Why not? I don't know. What do you think, Ben? Is the steam going to run out?
I think Mikel Arteta will be a little bit disappointed that first half had to come to an end. Like I say, when you've got that momentum, when you're on the run, you've got that confidence. You want that to continue. Arsenal were winning games and playing really, really well. The loss of Gabriel Jesus, of course, hurts. But what you lose in Jesus, you gain. With Emile Smith-Rowe, that was an opportunity for him, to get somewhere near to fitness and certainly pushing himself in contention. He's a great player. If you can get him out on the pitch and playing anything like, there's some of the performances that he was putting in last season. So, you might lose on one hand, but you gain in the other. Mikel Arteta didn't change his group a great deal in terms of rotation around the Premier League. So that little bit of a break, again, gives you an opportunity for players to maybe, refresh themselves and really attack this second half of the season. It remains to be seen on what kind of impact everything will have on, not only Arsenal, but every team within the Premier League. And particularly, I'm interested to see, for me, on the difference between those players who were involved in the World Cup out in Qatar and those who remained. Because there's a school of thought here that those who are at the World Cup will actually come on and perform better during the second half of the season, certainly during those early game weeks, because they have that momentum, they have that competitive edge. Whereas those who have, remained within their clubs, you cannot. It doesn't matter those bounce games, those behind closed doors friendlies. You have those heavily affected training sessions and games because of the weather. You're not able to get that level of intensity up, certainly for the Premier League. So it could be that those players who are returning, to competitive football for the first time in what would be 6 weeks or so, may struggle initially to transition to that level of, to that return to performance.
And I think this is one big thing. We've discussed this. You put it in the 888 Bet article as well. People can check that out. But, we've discussed how, looking at the data, there might be high variance at the start of the season for that reason. A bit of deconditioning for the players that didn't go, readjusting squads, re-amalgamating, and all those sorts of things. It will be an interesting period, to say the least, because there could be high variance. There could be high scoring games just because players just aren't back on it like we see at the start of pre-seasons and things like that. But that is all that there is today. We've got a few thank yous from people. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. We'll be back very soon during this crazy period of the Premier League now that it's back. It's just going to be non-stop. We'll be doing lots of regular content. We'll have the live streams, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. Do get involved with the comments. If you've got any requests for analysis, let us know. But we will be back very, very soon, and just wishing you a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas everyone. Have a great Christmas, and we'll definitely